Hello, everybody. I am Game Master Jacqueline here with GM Jesse, here to chat about who he is, what he's up to, and what kinds of things they do in and outside of Young Dragon Slayers. So, just as a kind of opening question so that people know, like, who you are and what your deal is, what kinds of things do you do outside of Young Dragon Slayers? I assume you do not run games of Dungeons and Dragons 100% of the time.
No, but it's a lot. I actually probably do because the fun thing about this being my career is it's also my hobby, and I have some amazing groups that I get to run games with that are outside of YDS, where I get to kind of do some. Dungeons and Dragons is great with what it allows and everything like that. But you and I both know that there's a ton of other games that are out there. I see a number. In fact, I think is that girl on your back shelf there.
Girl by Moonlight.
Yeah, Girl by Moonlight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like so. I have the opportunity to run some games with one group is a group of international people that kind of met through that, and then another one is a group of parents that don't get to go out, and so we all kind of like get to play games together. And then I do a podcast. It is meant for adults, but it's a podcast called Scritches. I think the last episode I think is coming out this week as we're talking. So I don't know when it'll be, but by the time you're hearing this, all the episodes should be out. Scritches was pitched to me as the movie Zootopia meets Chinatown. So I also write games. That's the other thing I do is like I create games, and I create more games sometimes than I really need to. One of my groups said, "Hey, I'd like to do Monster Hearts or I'd like to do Masks," and those are like they're both this system known as Powered by Apocalypse, which is very story forward. The original game was Apocalypse World, and it uses I had to drop one. It uses 2d6. I have one of my skull ones here.
Those are cool.
Yep. But they're similar games, but they're very different in approach. So I actually ended up merging them, creating my own game that I'll probably run for that group. And that's just a thing. Like it's a way of thinking like a game designer. And I think that's yeah. So outside of doing YDS, to answer your question, and not make a long story short, because I made it very long, I do a lot of game stuff. I do a lot of game design stuff. I'm a big nerd. I love comic books. I love superheroes. I'm a dad. That's a big one. I probably should have started with that one. But I have a beautiful little girl named Mickey. That's been an amazing experience. That's my, like, I stay at home with her and then run games, nights and weekends, which is a ton of fun.
First, I wanted to see like, what's your origin story as far as like tabletop role-playing games? Like, how did you get into them? And was there like a moment or an element of them that like got you? You're like, oh, this is it. Because you've done a bunch of different stuff and like, this is the thing that you've chosen to stick with. Why?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, like I, as a kid, I was an only child. And I was it was a single mom. And I was growing up and, I got really into comic books. I didn't know that I was dyslexic at the time. But and by the way, just so the audience knows, I'm old as we speak. I am 50 years old. And I'm aging, so I'll probably be older by the time you hear this. So back in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, like the comic books you got were all hand lettered. And so they'd hand me, C Spot Run, and I couldn't pick it out because it was all Times New Roman typeface or whatever, Times typeface, I think it was, but whatever it was. And then meanwhile, they'd hand me a comic book, and after 4 or 5 years old, I'm reading those all the way through, and I'm not touching like any other books. And so I don't know. I assumed that people thought I was a weirdo, but that was I loved comic books, but the big part of it was that the characters were a little bit different, and that's how I learned to read. So, when people are like, "Oh yeah, I got into like geeky stuff early," like it was really the first thing I got into. I was watching the Incredible Hulk reruns on like 2 or 3 years old. I was watching Star Trek. My grandmother. I remember I got chicken pox and I was out of school for 3 weeks. And my grandmother had just gotten knee surgery, and she watched a ton of PBS. And she had a big crush on the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. So that got me into Doctor Who. But Doctor Who to me was like a whole different thing. Like it was just like, oh, this is what like Star Wars is taking place far away and a long time ago, and Star Trek is taking place way in the future. But like Doctor Who is happening now, and for me that meant like, oh yeah, like I'm coming at it from superheroes. Spider-Man and Doctor Who could theoretically meet up, and that's kind of where that came from. And real early on, I was intrigued by the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, but we had my stepfather when my mom eventually met him, started dating him. He was very religious, and he wouldn't let me touch Dungeons and Dragons because it was the 80s, and Dungeons and Dragons back then was evil. Just kidding, it wasn't, but everybody thought it was. And the thing about like that I don't think people always realize is that there were a lot of other games, and the company that made Dungeons and Dragons made another game called Marvel Superheroes. When that came out, that was my 10th birthday. Marvel Superheroes was my first game, and I was like, great, I want to play this game with people, and nobody was around to play the game, so I was like, hey, does anybody want to play a game? And I started rolling up random characters for people, and people were like, oh, I'll choose Spider-Man or Hawkeye or whatever, and I just started running games, and that's how I started. But a couple years later, they came out with Planescape, and credit to Tony DiTerlizzi for creating a setting that I was just like, I need to run this game. And so I learned how to run Dungeons and Dragons in order to play and run that setting. So my first D&D games were a combination of Spelljammer and Planescape.
That sounds like such a good time.
But the fact, like, I love the random characters, like building these random weird characters that just you didn't know what they were going to be able to do or what they were going to be like. And same with Marvel. Marvel had the Ultimate Powers book, and you could build these just wacky builds that could do anything. And I really love that. I think what the reason that I started D&D with the weird settings that I did was because I was like, oh, I'm out there already.
You started pro DMing in 2007. Was it for like adult players, young players, whoever?
Adult players.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I'd run for kids a few times. I mean, partially running for kids was being a kid and kind of like remembering what that experience was. But I'd run for kids a couple times. Like friends would have kids that, would want to play, either in their group or like, together, that kind of thing. And then, I remember in 2007, there was a store, around Rochester that's known as the largest, role-playing game store. That's where I live, and I'm from Rochester, New York, which I mentioned before, called Millennium. And I was there, I used to play there every once in a while. I'd go meet up with people or play some of the games that were in there. And I ended up meeting this guy that was like, I wish I could find somebody to run games for me. And he wanted to do GURPS, and he was like, I can't find anybody that runs GURPS. I'm like, I run GURPS all the time. And he was like, oh, well, you run some GURPS for my group. I'm like, I don't have a ton of time. And he's like, well, I could pay you. And I'm like, wait, yeah, I could get paid to do this? I did tech for 30 years almost. And I lost my job in 2020 and was trying to find something else, and ended up doing this. And it's just been amazing. Like I like, this is what I do. This is how I make my money now. It's pretty great. I get to be a dad and run games, and those are like the two things I'm really good at. So
Yeah, it kind of is the dream in a lot of ways. What are some of the things that your players have been most drawn towards that you've put in your worlds, whether you expected it or not?
oh boy. So this last quarter, I have a setting that I've kind of played with a little bit, that is another extrapolation of Gate World, called Panopolis. And I've been running two of my games that take place in that, and they've like pulled in different ways. And in one of them, they ended up in this place called Duskfall Gulch, which was this like western town, but it was populated almost entirely by drow. And then the opposite town, it was a Hatfields and McCoys type situation. And the opposite number of that is a town of paladins who are elves, called Dawn's Hollow. And so like the two were like against each other. And the leader of Duskfall Gulch was Mayor Trinia, a drow. And they liked her a lot, like right away. They were like, she seems fine. The other group, not as much, which is like, okay. But then they met Sir Eladin, who was the leader of the Paladin. They were called the Dawnforge. And when everything was going on, like they didn't like him. But like at one point, I have the two of them in the same room towards the end of the quarter. And story arc, let's say, instead of quarter, towards the end of the story arc. And suddenly there's this like flirtation going on between them. And the player's like, oh. And suddenly it became like, we have to get them together. Like it has to happen.
So funny.
And I was like, oh, I didn't expect that at all. And so that was a lot of fun. You have to treat everything with a little bit of the same urgency, the same importance, because you don't know what they're going to be like. This is the thing I like the most. So, it's easy to have a dragon show up. I have a thing that I always tell everybody, that every quarter, ever since like my first 2 or 3 quarters, I've basically said every quarter there will be at least one dragon and at least one dungeon, because that is the name of the game. And so you have to have that. Now, how that shows up will be weird and random. Sometimes it'll be like a little tiny dragon. Sometimes the dungeon will be a little weird, but that's something that, having the dragon show up usually feels pretty significant. Right. But having the random character show up that you just, they decide to name is,
Anything you'd like to say to players or parents of your players if they happen to be watching?
For the parents that are out there that don't get this, that are like, I don't understand this. I don't know what this is. It's the sheer level of synaptic responses and elements and all those like the brain power things that D&D just triggers all the time, constantly, is just all over it's beyond anything else. And if you're looking at your kid and you're like, oh, I want this kid to be like the smartest person in the world, have them play D&D, because problem solving and teamwork and improvisation and like all those elements, project management like the correlation between project management and D&D, especially running D&D, huge.
That is lovely. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Jesse, for sharing all of this.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for folks to get to know you more, even just from like my having interacted with you and Young Dragon Slayers things. Thanks to everyone out there who is watching and is part of Young Dragon Slayers in some way or another. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and thanks again. Bye.
Bye.